Welcome everyone to the Indie Spotlight Recap video. This is for the month of November 2019. We had so many games submitted that we completely ran out of time to do them all in a single stream. So going forward, the new plan is we're going to keep these videos to about 15 to 20 minutes a piece. If we go over, we'll move on to a part 2 or even a part 3. As always, these videos are games that were submitted by developers, and if you'd like to submit a game for a future spotlight, please get in touch. But for our first game, this is Neon Noodles, a quote-unquote Zack-like, inspired by the programming puzzle style games from Zach Barth, aka Zachtronics of Opus Magnum, Shenzhen.io, Space Chem, and so on. So the idea for this one is that we're building programs to essentially create and serve food in a cyberpunk future. You can tell because of all the high-tech stuff in the background. Now, the game is very much about pseudocode. You're not going to be doing any kind of heavy coding, at least not in the version that I played. Instead, it's all about setting up commands. You can see the command list in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. And your mission is to complete the recipe that you see in the upper right hand corner. And the game itself is just about throwing in more and more layers. And similar to Zachtronics games, you're able to essentially go back and redo programs to try to get a better score. And I think there's going to be one glaring issue, at least in this current version of the game, that's going to hurt its appeal. And that is, a lot of the controls and menuing are built on the keyboard and not the mouse. And a lot of the shortcuts and just general play just feels very cumbersome because of it. And there are plenty of times as I was trying to go through this game that I was messing up on keys, not sure what I was supposed to click on. And the fact that the game is to keep pulling up a control UI in the upper left is not a good sign. This is incredibly true when it comes to actually adjusting the program that you see in the bottom left hand corner of the screen. While you can basically step in and out or step forward and backwards, I found it very annoying and very unintuitive to be able to do this. And it just felt easier to me just to delete the whole thing and just redo the program from scratch. And while that is a band-aid fix, it won't help when we get later in the game, which I assume will start introducing basically multi-step recipes. And I'm sure that's going to become even more annoying to play. And just overall at this version of the game, it doesn't seem to have even like the same quote-unquote accessibility or playability that Zach Barth has in his games. And even that could be on the low end of the scale for people who've played his titles. But it's an interesting idea, and again, I'll include links to all the games in the description down below. But let's move on to our next game now. And we're going from something very complicated to something very simple. This is the game Woven. And despite its appearance, this is not a Banjo-Kazooie or 3D platformer. Instead, what we have here is kind of a very light action adventure game. We play as our two friends here, a stuffed elephant and a mechanical, looks like a firefly, as we're exploring a world made entirely out of yarn. And the game itself was a Kickstarted title that did make its funding, and the game was pitched as kind of a very light-hearted, essentially for kids kind of gameplay. You're going to be exploring this world, looking for essentially the next step in a puzzle, or to figure out where you're supposed to be going. And all the puzzles and general play of the game are built around swapping out the various parts and colors of our friend here in order to either get a specific ability or to satisfy a color or pattern condition. And none of it is going to be high stakes or very challenging, at least not from what we played. The game has a very amazing look to it. It reminds me a lot of something like Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, or even like Yoshi's Woolly World and games like that. And outside of puzzles, you are free to mix and match your character however you see fit. Now, each part belongs to a different animal type, and you see those characteristics in the upper left-hand corner. And then from there, the various parts will have different functionalities to them. So a specific leg may be able to stretch or stomp on the ground. And this is all used for the puzzle solving. And there really isn't much else left to talk about with Woven. There are a lot of collectibles and story lore for you to find, but ultimately, this is a game that's kind of built around exploration. If you're looking for either a very challenging adventure game or expecting more on the 3D platforming or movement-based tech, you're not going to find that with Woven. But that doesn't necessarily make this a bad game. Like I said, this was pitched as something for kids and something on the lighthearted side. And if you're looking for kind of a good rainy day game, or something for a first timer to kind of play and get into, then I would say definitely give Woven a check. But, like I said, if you're somebody like me who's looking for more challenge in their games, this isn't going to be the game for you. And unfortunately, the same is going to be said of our next game that we're going to switch to now. And that is Lossember. This is a very beautiful looking game, and it's essentially designed, or it gives us the impression that we're going to be exploring this land as looks like either a coyote or a wolf, as we're trying to discover our long lost past, and essentially allow our soul to, I guess, basically find peace. And while the environment looks amazing, the gameplay itself, unfortunately, is kept very basic. I guess we could describe this as a pet or an animal simulator, as we'll be exploring the world and we're able to possess various creatures, such as the duck over here. I think there's a fish and other animals, so it allows us to do more exploration. But the general game is that we're looking for essentially these story points. You can see those kind of smoke signals in the distance there that will lead us to discovering our past, which will then open up the next story beat. There's plenty in terms of exploration, but none of it really matters other than finding these story cues. There are collectibles and plenty of MacGuffins to look at, but they're mainly there for completionist standpoints and don't really add to the gameplay. Not only that, but we actually ran into an issue that my duck kind of phased through the floor of an area and we kind of fell out of the world. But ultimately with Lossember, similar to Woven, it's a game that has a really impressive look and feel to it, but there's just not enough here from a gameplay standpoint to really keep my interest. If you're looking for, again, something that you can kind of zone out to and enjoy for the story, I would say give this one a check. But again, if you're hoping for at least some semblance of a gameplay loop, we didn't quite see that here. And because of that, there isn't a lot for me to really discuss, and why we're going to move on to our next game. And we're going to be talking about Alwa's Legacy. I also switched the font on our little title down there. Let me know which one you guys prefer. But we were playing the Kickstarted demo the developer was kind enough to give me, and we spoke with him on a podcast as well. But Alwa's Legacy is the sequel to Alwa's Awakening, which was pitched as a modern retro platformer with action-adventure elements to it. With Alwa's Legacy, the Kickstarter at this time I think should be either up or about finished, and they did hit their goal for it. And what they're aiming for with this is not only a 16-bit version of that game, or essentially a 16-bit sequel, but adding in more depth in terms of platforming and moves. So the demo that we're playing here, I think is kind of a condensed version of it, and it kind of gave us a way of looking at all the powers of the game, or at least the major ones, I should say. As our heroine here, we have 3 special abilities that we pick up. That green block that allows us to hit switches or adjust our height, the magical lightning bolt that lets us hit switches from far away or do damage, and a bubble that allows us to basically create platforms to bounce up. And all three powers will be combined to solve puzzles and just get around the environment. And the game from a platforming standpoint is on point. Similar to Alwa's Awakening, there's a lot of tricky jumps and challenges you're going to have to accomplish in the game to win. For anyone who played the first game, it did get very challenging near the end of it. There are new additions to Woz Legacy compared to the first game. There is a very basic skill tree that you find power orbs that can be used to upgrade your abilities. Now, this essentially gives them more functionality and more utility, but it's not necessarily going to be required to at least beat the game, at least not from what I think I was told. Another feature, you will find artifacts, and each artifact basically gives you a special ability that can be used in whatever room it's in. Now, if you have to use it again, you have to charge it up, but otherwise they recover after you leave or move from one room to the next. And the one that we got during the demo here is essentially a anti-shield ability, as you can see, as I'm now crossing over those spikes very easily. And the game, at least from the demo that we played, does a really good job of mixing up your various powers to use them in a variety of ways, and providing challenges and some more enhanced movement tech. One of the hardest things to do is to use the bubble to basically leap off the bubble just as it's about to run out, create another bubble while you're in midair, and kind of give yourself infinite jumping. And for players looking to get everything in Alwa, you're going to have to make use of that. And while the demo is only about 30 minutes or so, give or take, once you know what you're doing, it is a perfect encapsulation of all the mechanics and elements that Elden Pixels is looking to have in the full version of it. And I really enjoy this one, especially as a fan of the previous Alwa's Awakening. In terms of any issues or things like that, again, while this may look like your standard 16-bit platformer, it is on the difficult side, or at least on the more challenging side. They have spoken about doing more in terms of playability and accessibility with this one, but we don't know what that's going to be because it's not obviously in this demo version of it. With that said, I am a huge fan. I'm definitely going to be wanting to play this one when it's fully released, and especially now that the Kickstarter is done. Other than that, there really isn't much to say about Alwa's Awakening. If you're a fan of modern retro platforming or just 2D platforming in general, definitely give this one a look, and especially go back and check out Alwa's Awakening, because even though this is kind of set up as the sequel, the first game is its own standalone adventure with unique areas and boss fights to it. But with all that said, we're going to our quick Patreon supporter and sponsor shoutout break now. And when we return, we're going to cover a few more games, and like I said, we are definitely not getting through all of them in this video, but I'll talk to you all in a second. And now for a quick thank you to our current Game Wisdom Patreon supporters and sponsors. And if you continue this discussion on game design, be sure to check out our Discord channel, linked down below. If you're looking for more wisdom about game design, be sure to check out my latest offering of books, 20 Essential Games to Study, aimed for first-time developers and students looking for some inspiration for their upcoming games, and Game Design Deep Dive Platformers if you're interested in anything regarding 2D and 3D platforming design. They're both available in print, digital, and wherever books are being sold. For our next game, this is Story of a Gladiator, an action game where your mission is to basically survive wave after wave of arena battles, obviously in some kind of coliseum. The gameplay is kind of interesting in terms of its persistence and just moment to moment. Each arena fight is handmade, and there currently are 3 campaigns in the game, each one having successively more challenging events, throwing in more enemies or higher quality characters to fight. While it's being blocked at the moment by my picture down there, you have an applause meter or an audience meter that fills up as you do more damage, and as you just kind of keep the momentum going, then the people will throw you healing items or try and stun enemies. You can also summon a god power to kind of aid you, but you can only do that once per arena. Now, combat has you unlocking more moves as you play, and the idea is that the better you do in an arena, you earn more stars. The more stars you get will allow you to get more bonuses. And despite the basic gameplay, there's a lot of progression that goes into Story of a Gladiator. After each battle, you return to this hub area where you can spend gold and use skill points to unlock new moves, weapons, and just generally improve your overall utility. As a great touch, the skill points here can be respec'd whenever you want, and this allows you to mix and match your skills based on the battle at hand. And there are a lot of moves and abilities that you can unlock. Now, you need to go to the blacksmith here to buy new weapons, shields, and armor, and this is your only way of really improving your stats. You can spend gold on essentially consumable buffs before each arena, but ultimately, it's better to go for the permanent upgrades, as those will directly improve your stats and improve survivability. Now, the UI in general play definitely has kind of like a mobile feel to it. I think it's the fact that we're graded in stars and the limited nature of the animations of our character here. But with that said though, it has a great feel to it. However, it comes with some major caveats. Combat is not well designed, both for the player and the enemies themselves. Enemies get essentially animation and frame advantage with their attacks, and it's very easy for an enemy or for several enemies to stun lock you and get a kill. The enemy patterns themselves seem to be fixed, as in when you get close to them, they'll perform the same attack or the same combo, which you can then use that to exploit. Now, what you just saw there was the first boss of the game, and that is a hard stop for a lot of players. The reason why it was so easy for me was I essentially broke the combat system. And that was by getting the skills that allow you to stun an enemy with backstabs. Anything that stuns in this game is very powerful, because it prevents the enemy from finishing or continuing their combo. And like I said, you're going to find the later challenges that enemies can essentially attack you before you can even begin to strike due to animation advantage. And it's a way of essentially kind of artificially raising the difficulty of the title. And yes, enemies can animation track you once they start their combo. And I found a lot of the battles in Story of the Gladiator to be essentially one-sided. Either I beat them so easily that there's no challenge, or I'm stuck on them for several minutes due to whatever enemies that are spawned, or just because of how their attack patterns are. Now, from what we played on stream, this is kind of a short game if you know what you're doing. Essentially are the 3 campaigns, at least in this version of it, and this is a very interesting one in terms of whether or not to recommend it. The gameplay and progression model are all there, but it's not really balanced, I feel, for either the player or the AI. If you're looking for something, again, like on the later side of gameplay, I would give this one a check. Like I said, what's here is great, it just doesn't feel fully balanced. But with that said, we are coming up on 20 minutes. As I said, we're going to try to keep these videos somewhat organized. So, we're going to end our part 1 of the Indie Spotlight video recap here. And tune in for the next part because we have so many more games to cover. And we'll see when we get through them all then. If not, we'll move on to a part 3. But I would like to thank the developers who submitted their games for the Indie Spotlight. And once again, if you'd like me to play your game for our next Spotlight, usually held once a month, although we may want to move that to maybe twice a month at the rate we're going, let me know in the comments or send me a message. Otherwise, thank you for watching this video. Come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where examine the art and science of games. Until next time, have a great night. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoy things, be sure to do all the liking and subscribing that the kids are doing these days. Check out our Discord channel link down below where we hang out and chat game design, and come back later tonight for our regular streamings. But that's it, and tune in for more great content here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games.